Hello and welcome to episode 329 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay and me, Andy Leaks. Damien, welcome back. How are you doing?
I'm good. Well, I've picked myself off the floor, just like everybody else in the UK or in England after we lost the final.
Yeah, it didn't come home.
It didn't come home. It never really was it? So it's definitely not going to come home now. The people who are breaking into the stadium, because we're never going to host another tournament, are we? Quite frankly, so. Yeah, that was a shame. But on a positive note, moving forward, the season starts again soon. But even more positively, we've got Lauren on the show this week doing something about travel insurance because the economy is opening up again. And just after we make this podcast and it's released, then the rules are changing around the restrictions for COVID, etc. So we wanted to do a piece on travel insurance and going on holiday because there are a lot of people thinking about going on holiday. So one of the questions I'm asked often when I'm going around the place are you going on holiday this year? You got any plans? Well, personally, there's no chance I'm thinking of going on holiday, but I know lots of people are. So that's one of the pieces on the podcast. And the other pieces that we're going to have on the podcast are going to be an investment piece that's going to be interesting to people who don't invest as well. So it's about ethical companies. It's about how you assess a company's ethics. So ESG is the acronym people will know. And we're going to talk about how you can find out a grade for a company. So it means if you're investing in shares, you want to buy shares in a company, or if there's a fund that you want to invest in that has these companies within it, you can look at the ethical rating for these companies. But not only that, if you are a person who doesn't invest and you want to just see whether you want to use a company, buy a car from a company, you can use these ratings to make a decision. And the final piece on the podcast is about cybersecurity. So there's like an MOT you can do to improve your online security. So I want to run through that and give people some pointers about things they should be thinking about.
Okay, so the first piece we're going to start with then is the travel insurance piece, and we're going to get Lauren on. And I know she's been doing lots and lots of research on this, and it is a minefield because of what's happening with the economy opening up again and the announcements from the government. And Lauren's been beavering away for days on this, and I'm delighted that she's back on the show. Lauren, I suppose the first question I've got to ask you, because this is what everyone's screaming at us right now, is I'm going away, I'm going to need some travel insurance. Does it cover COVID?
Yes, so thank you for welcoming me back onto the pod this week. I have been looking at travel insurance all this week, and as you say, Andy, it is a minefield. I've been desperate to go away like the rest of the country, but I must admit, looking at this, it has made me wary. I'm not sure I'm going to be going away anytime soon. The amount of times I spoke to Damien with my head in my hands.
Yeah, because to give people an insight, we choose a topic on the podcast, and sometimes a topic seems something quite straightforward in terms of question, but the amount of work that Lauren had to do to try and answer these questions, there were days that she did have her head in her hands because it's not that straightforward. So does travel insurance cover COVID?
So in short, yes, you can get cover for COVID if you are travelling. Now, this is dependent down to the travel insurance provider, so you would need to check your travel insurance documents very, very carefully before booking a holiday and going away. But the ABI, so the Association of British Insurers, travel insurance and insurance companies register with those, and any travel insurance company that is registered with the ABI will continue to provide cover for emergency medical treatment needed overseas, and this includes emergency medical treatment related to COVID-19. Where there are caveats around COVID is whether you have cover for cancellation due to COVID-19. Now, we will go into this in a bit more detail about the different nuances towards the cover for COVID-19. But in short, if you do get COVID at some point, either prior to going away or whilst you are away, you are likely to have some form of cover. But as I say, it is imperative that you check your policy documents carefully to ensure you know exactly what you are covered for.
Okay, so let's start with some scenarios. Let's say you've booked a holiday and you're going to go away and then you get COVID and you are therefore unable to travel because you've got to isolate. What is the stance with insurers there?
So this is where you will need to check your policy documents and with your travel insurer carefully, because not all insurers will cover you for cancellation if you need to cancel your trip because you have got COVID. However, The post office and LV, those travel insurance policies, will cover you for cancellation if you test positive for COVID within 14 days of your trip. Some of those, such as LV and also an insurance company called StaySure, they will also cover you if someone you are traveling with, a travel companion or a relative, gets COVID, or someone that you live with at home, if they test positive for COVID and therefore you cannot travel because you have been around that person, then they will also cover you for cancelling your trip. You do have to check your policy documents carefully because there are some caveats around this. For example, in LV's policy documents, they have the following clause: cancellation and curtailment claims are only valid if evidence can be provided that all other appropriate avenues, e.g. rebooking or refund from the trip or payment provider, have been exhausted. Therefore, in this instance, you do have to check with your travel provider first, if you have booked a package holiday, for example, if you can rearrange the trip for a later date.
So that's quite interesting. So as a tip to people, just because it may look at the top level like an insurance policy will cover you if you can't go on holiday because of COVID, say you get it or someone in your family, which means you have to isolate, it may look like you've got the cover, but you need to check if the terms and conditions state that you have to have exhausted all other avenues of rearranging, because that's a bit different. Because if you think about it, if you can't go on holiday and you can therefore rearrange it to another date and you might not necessarily be as convenient for you, you won't necessarily get the payout. So make sure then, is your tip, that you check the T's and C's to see if that's included, because presumably then you pay for insurance policy, the holiday gets moved. Let's say you bought a single trip travel insurance policy, the holiday gets moved to later in the year, so that's not in that period of time which that insurance policy would cover. They haven't paid out because the trip's been moved, then you would have paid for a policy that you're not actually ever going to be able to claim on because there's no holiday going on in that. So are any insurers doing anything to mitigate that for consumers?
Yes, so this will depend on your independent travel insurance provider. Some of them will be quite accommodating in being able to potentially move the date that your travel insurance is covered for. So, for example, the post office, they have said that you need to check with your airline and tour operator and the travel company if you can move your trip. And if you can, they say that they will look at moving the period your policy covers you for by up to 1 year from your original purchase date. So it is possible that you could potentially move the period of time that you are covered for your travel insurance if you cannot go for the original date that you intended to. That does obviously vary dependent on the travel insurance provider. So that is something you would need to check before doing so. In the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, I was due to go away in October of 2020. And I had a travel insurance policy with Virgin Money. And obviously I had an annual policy and I couldn't go on holiday at all. And I actually contacted them and said, I haven't been able to use my travel insurance policy. Can I get a refund? And they didn't hesitate. They actually gave me a refund straight away because obviously I hadn't used the travel insurance policy.
For how much though? For that period or the whole year?
I had the whole annual policy refunded. I mean, it wasn't a lot of money. I was probably being a bit pedantic, really. It was only £36 something. But I mean, £36.
£36, Lauren.
You know what I'm like for budgeting.
No, you're not like me, whose travel insurance costs a fortune because of existing medical conditions. But that's a good tip as well, though, that if you don't go or can't go, then make sure you do speak to your insurer, because you may be able to get your money back if you haven't been able to go on the trip. And that's particularly relevant if you take a single trip policy out. So that's if you can't go. There is also cover. I mean, I saw you mention that some of them will give if you have a relative that dies from COVID. So you haven't got COVID, you haven't had to isolate, but somebody you know has died, has been a bereavement, they might cover you in some instances. So you can check that. Let's think about if you're going on holiday now. So you wanted to book a holiday. So we're here. This is where, hang on, strap in everybody. This is where it gets a bit tricky, because we're talking about traffic light systems. We're talking about the government advice about whether you travel. So let's say I'm going to book a holiday now and I've gone and booked a holiday and it's on the green list, which means that I'm not going to have to self-isolate. And I want to go to that country, and then the circumstances change. There's suddenly an outbreak of COVID in that country, and I either don't want to go, or in the case where we're advised not to go. I mean, what are the rules, or what seems to be the current stance of insurers around those sorts of circumstances?
So what you need to look at is the FCDO advice. So they are the people who determine where you can travel to. And they also do that outside of coronavirus. They're the people that say if there's particular terrorism risk in a certain country, they will advise against travel there, and that would invalidate your insurance outside of coronavirus. So this now applies within coronavirus. So if they advise against traveling somewhere and you still go, your travel insurance will be invalidated because they have told you that you should not be going there. But if they say that you can go to a country and you decide that you don't want to go because of, you say, a coronavirus outbreak in that particular country, then you will not be covered by your travel insurance policy because you've decided that you don't want to go. So in that instance, you would have to take it upon yourself to potentially try and get it moved. But as you say, you won't be able to cancel your trip and get a refund from your travel insurance provider.
So the FCDO is the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, for people who wonder what that acronym stood for. So as Lauren said, you can go and look at the advice that they have online about where you should and shouldn't travel to. So that's the important part you're saying. So how does that interact with the amber, green and red list that you see out there? I mean, that's just relating to your quarantining conditions when you come back.
Yeah, so the amber, green and red list is about the coronavirus quarantining when you return to the UK. But currently, so as this podcast is released, the FCDO are advising against travel to amber and red listed countries. So if you went on holiday on Sunday, you potentially could be invalidating your travel insurance policy because the FCDO have advised against travel. Obviously, the government are changing the advice. So from Monday, the 19th of July, this is now changing, and the FCDO are no longer advising against travel to amber countries. And the amber countries are obviously, if you are double vaccinated, you return back to the UK, you do not have to isolate upon your return, but you do have to take a coronavirus test.
I tell you what, this is a nightmare. So the message was simple and it was just the FCDO. Then obviously you've got the amber list and the red and the green for the quarantining. But of course, when you go and look at the .gov.uk website, when it talks about the travel restrictions and these amber, green and red lists. This is where we had a big discussion in the office, because at the top of the page it then says you shouldn't travel to the amber list, which really muddies the water, because when you look around what insurers are saying, then that would suggest, as Lauren's discovered, that travel to amber list countries would have invalidated their travel insurance and they hadn't probably realised. And now the message is check that part of the website. We'll put a link to the page on the government website, because presumably from July the 19th, this is going to update. So you need to keep an eye on that before you travel, not just because of what might happen with quarantining, but actually for your own travel insurance. So a quick question then, other people will be thinking, let's say you went on holiday in the country you travelled to was on the green list and it then moves down into one of the other colours. How does that impact your travel insurance policy? Presumably you'll be covered.
Yeah, so what you would need to check in that instance is the FCDO advice. If their advice has not changed, then your travel insurance policy will not be affected. So for example, Virgin Money said if your trip was allowed at the time you left the country, you'll still be covered as usual under the policy. This includes medical cover if you test positive for coronavirus while abroad. However, one thing you would need to consider is if it did move into a red level country, obviously that would mean that when you land back in the UK, you will then have to quarantine in a hotel, which you will have to pay for. And this is not covered under your travel insurance policy.
God, that's a good tip, actually. So that's a good thing to point out. But as you say, it's about what the situation was when you left and travelled. So if it was in one of the OK lists, the FCDO were fine with it, then you will still be covered even if it moves into one of the lists which is no longer okay to start travelling to. But if you've already gone, you'll be okay. But like you say, that's a great point on the quarantine costs when you get back to the UK. So I've got two more questions on this then. What happens if you go abroad and you catch COVID while in that country?
So in most instances, you should be covered if you get COVID whilst you're abroad, particularly for medical expenses. And some insurers will also cover the cost of accommodation whilst you're abroad for having to extend your trip. So for example, Virgin Money said they will cover additional accommodation costs up to £2,000 if the treatment that you require for COVID whilst you're abroad means that your trip has to be extended.
And what about repatriation? If you have to be brought back to the UK, unfortunately, and probably in a poor state, do any of them cover that?
Yeah, most ABI travel insurers do cover that as a standard if you do need repatriation to the UK. And also, it's just worth mentioning as well, if you have booked an action-packed holiday and you have to cancel any excursions due to getting coronavirus whilst you're abroad, some insurers such as LV will cover the cost to reimburse you for those excursions that you were unable to do.
So that's a brilliant piece. There is going to be an article that we're going to link to in the show notes, and you'll find it on the site in the coming days, which has much more information around this, which Lauren has written. But the message from this part of the podcast is that the travel insurance industry has adapted to the world of coronavirus. And so you have to just think about the things like excursions, like the cancellation policies, the tips that Lauren has mentioned, just to check those T's and C's if you are at all concerned about COVID and whether you're going to be covered for your holiday.
Okay, so moving on to the next part of the pod then, and we're going to be looking at ESG ratings. And there's a tool that we found that's, well, we kind of lost an afternoon, didn't we?
To be quite frank, you're going to lose an afternoon listening to this podcast because I'm always doing stuff with investing and looking around topics. And ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And that is a broad term that people use with regard to ethical investing. So if you go back and listen to our ethical investing past podcasts, we'll link to them in the show notes. And we did a live event, if you remember, where we did a YouTube session and on Facebook talking about investing ethically. And one of the problems with investing ethically is the various acronyms, but also the data about how ethical companies are. And one of the tips I had for investors was that you could go and look at obviously some of the ethical funds that exist out there, but you could look at things like Interactive Investor have a tool that lists a short list of funds that they've screened for ethical criteria that can be useful. But I came across a tool that is going to be incredibly useful for anybody who wants to buy shares directly in companies, or if you want to invest in funds, if you want to determine a fund's ESG rating in inverted commas, like you determine it yourself by looking at the companies it invests in, or if you are just a person who wants to use companies, buy products from companies as a consumer that have some ethics. And interestingly, MSCI, so they're the people who create lots of the indices you hear me talk about on midweek markets. They have got a tool that is an ESG rating tool, and they rate over 2,800 companies on key ESG issues. So that would be things like corporate governance. It could be things to do with corporate behavior, how they develop their employees, the consumer financial protection, their environmental impact, their privacy and data security. It's a whole raft of things. And the tool, we're going to link to it in the show notes, but I'll read out the URL. It's very long. It's msci.com/our-solutions/ESG-ratings-corporate-search-tool. Now, I'm exhausted reading that out, but we'll link to it in the show notes and on the article on the website. But what the tool does is you can go on there and
welcome back to the podcast for those that fast forwarded.
You can go on the tool and they have an app. I suggest you download the app. It's free and it's much quicker to search in. And the tool works by, if you start typing in a company, it will then give it a rating. And the ratings work from AAA at the top end down to CCC at the bottom end. And so they are then given a rating AAA, AA, A, triple B, double B, B, triple C. And they're given a red colour, so they're laggards in their sector, because this tool is relative to the sector the companies live in. So car manufacturers will all be in the same category. Laggards have a B or a triple C rating. If you're average, you have between a double B or an A rating, so that includes obviously triple B. And if you're a leader in your field, then you have a double A and a triple A rating. So I sat there and lost an afternoon. I then showed the tool to the whole Money to the Masses team and they lost an afternoon. So we wrecked productivity, because what will happen, you'll start putting in companies you know and start seeing what their ESG rating is. And you'll be quite shocked at some of them in both a positive and negative way. And so as an investor, what this means, use the tool to be able to see whether you want to invest in Apple shares, for example. Does it adhere to your own ethics? But you could look at a fund, look at the fact sheet, look at the top 10 holdings, and you could go down and see what some of the ESG ratings are for those companies, and that can give you a bit of a feel for the fund overall. Because don't forget that funds aren't necessarily marked as ethical, and you may have all sorts of funds within your portfolio. So to give people a steer, because we went down and we started playing social media platforms, Facebook has a B rating, which actually makes it a laggard in its sector, and Twitter is double B, so that means it's average. So the message is, if you're worried about ethics, maybe you should use Twitter rather than Facebook. Going down to banks, Lloyds are AA rated. That puts them as a leader in their field alongside HSBC and NatWest. Barclays are an A, which puts them as average, and they lag on corporate behaviour, financial product safety, and human capital development. So basically how they develop their employees. Santander, on the other hand, are triple B, and they lag on their financial product safety. So triple B still makes them an average for their sector. So you could use the tool to decide who you bank with. Now, one of the things you've got to do is that you've got to find the companies, and sometimes it means you've got to do a bit of research, because you might have to rank the company that owns the brand, because not brands aren't rated, it's the companies that own them. So bearing that in mind, if you go and look at things like coffee, so coffee chains, Starbucks are triple B rated, which puts them as average, and they are laggards for product safety and quality and labour management. So perhaps for some people that may not be surprising. But Costa, on the other hand, and I didn't know this, but Costa are part of the Coca-Cola company. Coca-Cola company as a broad entity has a AA rating, which makes it a market leader. So if you want to drink coffee from a company that has great ESG governance, then you would perhaps choose Costa Coffee over Starbucks. Supermarkets, I even started looking at supermarkets. The supermarkets do pretty well. Sainsbury's is the leader by a long way. It's a AAA rated. That's the top rating you can get in your sector. Only about 2% of companies get that. Then in the next tier down, still regarded as a leader, is Tesco and Morrison. Ocado are an A, that puts them in the average category. So maybe you might decide you want to start to choose your supermarket based on their ethical rating. There are a lot of people out there that are bothered by this sort of thing. Walmart are double B, which puts them on the bottom end of average. Interestingly, while we're talking about buying things, Amazon are triple B, so that puts them smack bang average, and they've only just recently risen as well. So you might decide that you might not want to use Amazon anymore. You might want to use some of the other bigger chains, or you might decide to shop more locally. It even has car manufacturers, of course. If you're looking at cars, Ford are a B, as are General Motors. So if you look at any cars that they make, B makes them a laggard. That puts them in the bottom part. So they would get a red rating from MSCI. But you can contrast that to BMW, who actually got an A. So that puts them at the right top end of average. Like I say, go to the tool, download the app. You're going to lose an afternoon. One thing I'd say about the app, which is better, if you start searching, so you put in a letter, it will then give you all the companies starting with that letter, and beside the company names in the drop down is the actual rating. So you can see very quickly lots of companies, whereas on the online version, you have to just pick the company one by one when you start searching to be able to see the ratings. You'll be devastated to know that Domino Pizza is a triple B. Just Eat is also a triple B, so you might not want to be using those. McDonald's is a triple B as well. One of the ones I found, if you looked at the owners of Homebase and B&Q and compared their ratings, then the owner of B&Q is AAA rated, which is pretty impressive, whereas the owner of Homebase is triple B rated. So if you're bothered about ethics, you might want to use B&Q over Homebase. But then if you go down, you look at things like eBay, you can see over time they've gone from a double B to an A. Etsy's triple B. If you're looking at travel, Expedia is a B. So all of these things you can have a look at. Even airlines, there's a variation in airlines actually, because it's not done based on the industry they're in. They will get a bad rating if they're doing things like selling arms or doing any of the real dodgy things in the world. They'll get a bad rating. But overall, it's quite interesting. And the last one is Apple are triple B while Microsoft are triple A. So if you're like me and have lots of Apple products, perhaps I need to rethink that and start getting a Microsoft product if I'm going to be worried about ESG ratings. So there you go, something to lose your afternoon in.
Okay, so we're doubling down really on asking people to go and use tools and sort of lose afternoons. And there's another thing that came up this week that you were looking at, Damien, and it's about cyber awareness really and cyber security. There's a tool that you can use from the National Cyber Security Centre where you can actually improve your online security, which it's obviously a good thing. It's probably something I need to do because I'm a nightmare for these things.
So the web address for the tool, again, we'll put it in the notes, etc., but it's ncsc.gov.uk/cyberaware/home. And if you go there, it's an MOT for your online cybersecurity. So what it will do is it will give you a personalized to-do list to try and protect yourself or your business online. So it gives you a free cyber action plan. I discovered this tool, went through it. It takes 2 to 3 minutes. It is well worth you doing it while listening to this podcast because it will give you some hints and tips and things you need to do. But even if you don't run the tool, I'm going to go through some of the questions that it asks you. So it will give you a hint to the things you need to be doing. So you can use the tool as a small business owner, and so it will ask you the things you should be doing as a small business owner and also personally. And there's some overlap to some of the questions. So I'm going to go through these because they provide prompts. The answer to these questions quite clearly will give you the action points you need to do on your to-do list. So the first one is, do you have a recent backup of all your important work information if you're a small business owner? Do you use a strong password for your work email? Do you use a strong password for your personal email? Are they different? If you're a business owner, is your work email different from all the other passwords you use on other services? Because the last thing you want is people to be able to guess your password for your work stuff. Similarly, for your personal email, is it different from other services? Do you use two-factor authentication? Is it turned on all your important work accounts? Is it turned on all your important personal accounts? So email, banking, social media. And so I make sure I have them on. If you don't know what two-factor authentication is, then go into your email provider. There will be a setting on there under security. So what it does, it gives you a second way of verifying who you are, usually via a text message. So you'll get the text message, you have to enter a code in. So you want that on everything that you use if possible.
And that type of thing, people are sometimes not scared of that, but they don't want to faff about with it because they think it's an issue. Generally, these things are set up so that they alert you if there's a new device that's tried to sort of access. So it's not going to do it every day. It's not that inconvenient, is it?
No, and some of them you can have it so it doesn't ask for the two-factor authentication on the device you're using all the time for a period of time. And so that means you don't have to keep using it. And don't forget that two-factor authentication can also get to the point where it's done on Face ID, for example, on your phone. So you log in, it's got that element of security as well. So that's all built into it. So the two-factor authentication doesn't become a problem. All that happens, especially now on modern phones, you log into something, you might get a text message ping, and the browser will already be suggesting that they're going to take the number in that text message and put it in the field on your login. It's so simple to do. The other thing it asks about is, do you have screen auto locks put on your devices? So when you put it down for a period of time, does it then lock itself? Do you have PIN codes, passcodes, Face ID, as I mentioned? Do you have Find My Devices? So for Apple, they have that a lot. Play Protect for Android devices. So do you have all those things turned on? Because don't forget, the Find My Device function often allows you to wipe a phone remotely when you've lost it. So if somebody tries to use it, do you have your firewalls turned on, your desktops or laptops? And is the antivirus enabled where provided? These are all questions that the tool will ask you, and then it will give you your action plan. But they do give you prompts as I'm reading them out to think, do I do any of this stuff? Are all your main devices running the most up-to-date software? That's not just your computers, that's talking about your phones as well. So the apps, do you allow it to auto download updated versions of apps? The reason you want to do that, because the new downloaded versions will plug any security flaws that exist. Do you have smart connected devices? So they are things like TVs, watches, fitness trackers, baby cameras, monitors, security cameras, doorbells, things like Ring, and personalized medical devices. So you get these monitors that you can wear. And the reason they will ask this is because they start to suggest, have you looked at the passwords that are on those? Are they set to the defaults of the device? So people can easily guess them as like 000 or admin or whatever they are. And I once went to a tech show where a guy on stage had built a mock-up home with all these devices in, and he showed how easy it was to hack and take over someone's home and via cameras and those sorts of things. So it will give you prompts about making sure you aren't going to be a victim of that kind of hacking. Do you have backups of all your information? So do you automatically back up to the cloud or a hard drive, emails, files, photos, those kind of things? So if you lose the devices, that you can access them. And another thing, do you only install software from official sources? So these are some of the questions you're going to be asked. Go and do the tool. It will provide you some good prompts and tasks to do, and it also gives you the instructions of how to do them, which is really good as well. I think it's a brilliant tool. If you do nothing else today, make sure you go through that and actually tick off some of those tasks. I think you would thank us in the future.
And it's also just something to think about. So when you're signing up for, new services and adding new passwords, or maybe if you've got children and you've got to set up accounts for them for various different things, just thinking about those two-factor authentications and all the ways that you can sort of protect yourself, it's good to think about.
Yeah, and I can't remember which podcast episode it was in the past where we did a piece about how important your email address is and to protect it. And I'll just recap the story very quickly for those who haven't heard that podcast. But there was a story that I read about a journalist who'd had their email account hacked, and the person then, from your email account is your hub of your life, and from there you could then go and see what services, what banking you have, everything you're connected to in the world, and start requesting resets. And they were resetting all their passwords to their banking and everything. And they took over their entire life, locked it down, and then said to the person they could only get the money back by paying a ransom. But of course, if they'd had two-factor authentication, it would have limited the person logging in because they wouldn't have had the passcode, the text message that was sent to them. So make sure if they don't do anything else, put two-factor authentication on your personal email and work email.
So that's it for this week. If you want to get in touch with Damien, you can do so. It's Damien at moneytothemasses.com. Twitter, it's at moneytothemasses with the number 2. We're on Instagram. We've got the Facebook group as well. And of course, we're on YouTube. If you want to check out any of those videos, Lauren's been doing lots and lots of videos recently.
And also, we have entered the world of TikTok this week. And we have. Why are you laughing? We're getting down with the kids, Andy. One of the videos we did, actually, I'm quite impressed. It had 1,800 views within 24 hours. I'm not sure if that's brilliant or good or bad on TikTok, but it's a start.
It is a start, and it's a way that you can see behind the curtain on some of our stuff. There's going to be loads of fun stuff going on.
Yeah, and Justin appears in them. We're doing a bit of a twin thing, so if you want to see Justin playing the full card while I answer the questions, he was up for it. It was his idea. You'll probably enjoy that.
So that's it. We're done for this week. Until next time.
Until next time.